My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. We are continuing Swamiji's teachings of Principle 7, which is effort. And this chapter is very important because it talks about how we need to put in continuous effort for the discovery of our own self. And once you have discovered it, once you've discovered who you are, you see that there is a steady state that one achieves. And there are tendencies that can, make us forget. There are tendencies that can, make us, take things for granted. This is human nature, right? So how do we continuously keep ourselves, attuned to this oneness? Somewhat like if you see a car, when we service the car runs really well. But as the car is driven, you see that as it engages and, as you continuously drive, there is a sense of friction and drag that builds up. And it impacts, your engine oil needs to change and all those things need to change. In that same way, we see that as we wake up and we engage the material world, there are things that we carry with us. There are things, baggage that we carry that are good and, sugha and dukkha thoughts. Our mind becomes, the most kind of good things that we experience. We feel good. There are things that sometimes challenge us. There are things that are quite sorrowful. There are things that could be very frustrating. There are things that can make us, depressed and a whole range. So like the car that goes through this friction that accumulates and the engine oil that is really clean and pure ends up becoming, polluted and contaminated because of all the changes. In the same way, our mind too goes through this evolution. As how we service the car, we've got to service our mind. In the process of servicing the mind, many people use different things. Some, take alcohol, others to release tension, they smoke, others resort to more other things, which is not very good for the body nor the mind. So Mahans and other great saints have shown a way where we can always reboot our system, rejuvenate our mind, sharpen our intellect, and more importantly, give us that oneness. Even if you see a knife, when we continuously use the knife becomes blunted, right? So what do? We sharpen the knife so that the next time we can use it more effectively. So this process of evolution, transformation, sharpening, all those things requires one to put in an effort. Like how when you take the car for service, there's an effort, there is a cost that you incur. As you sharpen the knife, there is an effort. Similarly, to expand the mind, keep it, transformative, creative, innovative, and also keeping the mind free from all the vagaries of life, the sugha dukkha, the maya, all those things that keeps the mind light so that it stays enlightened requires a fair bit of effort, right? So without the effort, we tend to, be drawn into this cycle of life that after a while people get tired. And we see that many people, go through many emotional challenges in their lives, and that makes them, their mind becomes blunted, and the mind is unable to cognize things clearly. When you lack the clarity, one then sees that to experience that enlightenment becomes more challenging. So in this, Swamiji talks about effort. And effort requires, as I said, we start off normally when the guru gives you an initiation, we practice it really well. but that requires us to achieve that perfect harmony, to have the oneness. One needs to put in the effort. And I showed you in the last class that acquiring the spiritual compass that helps us, guides us to overcome those gravity of this materiality, to ultimately become transcendental to this cause and effect, this material life, the material forces of life. And I showed you the different stages that everybody goes through, a Mahan or a character like, great saints that we have spoken about. There is this continuous, relentless push towards practice, patience, perseverance, persistence, and ultimately to attain that Paranjyoti state. There is that continuous intensity in them. And I showed you that, if every day we took, we know where we are, what we are doing, and every day we improve the way we think, the way we speak, the way we behave, the way we see the world. Every day, learn something new, right? And you see that if you put in that effort, within 21 days of that initiation or the Guru's touch or the Guru's inspiration, moves you to over 1.06 of attaining the harmony. For 100 days, you do that, your harmony level goes up by 5%. Not much, but still quite significant. And I showed you that as you continuously, relentlessly do this, as Swami says, true noka noka, that intensity is so important. As we intensify, intensity doesn't mean you don't enjoy life. You enjoy life even more because it's more magnified. Enjoy everything in a more magnified way because it's more sharper. You're not distracted. Your energy is not dissipated. And if you did that, within 1 year, you would be able to attain close to 20%. That means you've gained so much ground, so you're becoming more harmonious. Area thinks that before you were less harmonious, always kind of complaining. You see that now 20%. And as you intensify this, you see that your harmonious level increases. Ultimately, you are in that state of perfect harmony. Nothing perturbs you, right? So there is this stage that we go through. In that same way, actually, the human mind is that way. If you look at when we learn to drive, we are so holding the steering, we're always watching, But as we intensify over time, it becomes a process that is natural. And that the moment you get in the car, you know exactly what you're doing. It's kind of you're on autopilot, right? And that's exactly what happens here, is that ultimately as you intensify over time, this mind becomes an autopilot, getting back to its own natural state of existence. And I spoke about why we don't achieve this smooth transition. There are things that I spoke about. Phase 1, when we first start meditating, yes, we have difficulty concentrating, there's lack of consistency, a lot of complacencies. This is what happens. The first 21 days is okay. The next 100 days, you see that, there is lack of consistency, things are not working out, and people tend to give up very quickly. And I spoke about how we can address this phase 1 challenges. So how do we address it? We really need to dedicate time for ourselves to discover who we are, be consistent, attending satsangs, attending reading, all those things, and putting to practice what the Guru teaches. Not experiment here, experiment there. Focus on what the Guru is teaching you. Then I spoke about phase 2. So say you pass the phase. Now the 1 year mark is a very important mark. If you are able to be successful, almost 20% of your mind becomes more harmonious. You still have to work on the 80%. Why is it that many people don't get it? Yeah, they would have probably got something in the first year of practicing, but there is this complacency. I got it. I know what it is. But they get distracted with the vagaries of life, the duties and this and that. But the guru says, this is the most important thing in your life. If you do this really well, everything else will be really good. Complacency sets in, we get distracted. We're very busy with our day-to-day activities. We have no time for many things, right? And the next phase is that when we do that, we stop that intensive inquiry. We're always firefighting. And this is what happens to an ordinary person in their life. They're so caught up by their own things. And I spoke about in last week, how do we overcome this phase of our lives? Everybody goes through this. I've also gone through this, right? So you must be consistent with your meditational practices. This is very, very important. It's something that I have, it's my time. Nobody else's should be encroaching into this time, right? And the best time is very early in the morning when everybody else is sleeping. The second aspect is that by doing this, to overcome this, you need to intensify your acquisition of wisdom knowledge. There are three types of knowledge that we need. One is the contemporary knowledge about the things around us, changes that's happening, changes to our body, right? Number two is that eternal knowledge that is permanent, knowledge that has no change, knowledge about truth, knowledge about reality. Sometimes these knowledge could be very abstract, right? This morning, I posted something on the WhatsApp, and on how one sees this abstract knowledge working out in our day-to-day life. How this abstract understanding of ourselves gives rise to everything that is happening in our life at the present moment. So this acquisition of this contemporary and eternal knowledge is very important. But the third important knowledge is also the experiential knowledge. Yes, we have learned this. What's the experience? What's the impact? What's the value to my life? One needs to start. When we do that, that is when we truly get that wisdom knowledge. We know what is changing, why it's changing, how it's changing, and when it's changing. We also then learn what is unchanging, why it's unchanging, how is it that it's unchanging, and when is it that we experience this unchanging. We start, our mind becomes more and more sharper. And then when we have that understanding, we have that, wow, that nice feeling, that I understand things better, right? And we always need to take time to reflect on this, contemplate what this is, and why these things are leading to good outcomes or better outcomes or expansion. There are moments that we understand challenges in our lives better. And the challenges gives us the foundation to become more and more enlightened, right? So we learn to understand why things are changing, how things are changing, when things are changing. And the same thing, how things become transcendental. And we integrate this into our DNA, our mental DNA. And slowly, slowly, we see that we have glimpses of that enlightenment. So this intensity is very important. This is in phase 2. In the first year, it is really push-up. I want to now cover to phase 3. Now, phase 3 is also within that period of 2 years. Now that you understand meditation, now, one is understanding the meditation and the knowledge that you have learned in school, and the knowledge about your own biology. We all have our own biology, physical body. Whenever we eat something, some people's sugar level doesn't go up, others, the sugar level goes up. So while we're eating the same thing, the way the body reacts is very different. In that same way, how our mind reacts to information, our intellect, how it digests and gives us that sharpness and the creativity, very different. So this is the first part of trying to understand the physiology of our body, our mind, our intellect. But we then start intensifying much more deeper knowledge, the broader knowledge of not only understanding who we are, but also understanding the concept of God and the concept of universe and how we bring all of this together. That requires a fair bit of understanding one's own dynamics beyond our own biology. And this is where we see that in the first 2 years, we should be absorbing, assimilating as much information as possible, right? So if you see that when you do an undergraduate degree, a 4-year degree, the first year is a general year. We learn many things. In the second year, we start specializing. Okay, we're getting the first step of what we want to know, something very deep. So we want to know about the concept of God, Dvaitva. What is Dvaitva? Dvaitam. Know all those teachings of Dvaitam. Why is it that, how do they see God and the universe and the self? You learn about Advaita, or non-duality. What does it actually mean? How is it related to me? How does Dvaita relate to me, and how does Advaita relate to me? Is there convergence between the two, or is there a divergence? Right? So now you're looking at the great philosophies in much more sharper lens. Before, you could not do this. As you sharpen and strengthen yourself, the mind becomes thirsty for this knowledge. Starts reading Mahan's book, read Bhagavad Gita, read Yogananda's book, read J.K. Krishnamurti, all these different people. You start reading. Your mind becomes absorbing, understanding, assimilating, reading all the religious scriptures, reading Tirumandiram, reading all those things, and the mind becomes so preoccupied, wanting to discover itself, discover God, and discover the universe, and try to bring that convergence in the two. First 2 to 3 years is so important. Now, something very interesting happens in this point. The mind is no more distracted by all those frivolous things. Yes, you do your duty as a father, as a mother, as a parent, as a student, but your mind is in this context of the lens that is transitioning from that individual to that universal. That separateness of God, self, and the universe to the convergence. So it's not converged yet. Your lens is starting to converge in the state of convergence. You have many questions. That many questions will lead you to many teachers, teachings, scriptures, and the mind starts gravitating and try to make sense of this convergence. Not understood yet, but the convergence is taking place. The change is happening from being the material being to shifting from outside to that inside, to that more spiritual universal being. So the transition starts taking place. In that transition, so many questions, so many doubts, so many, inquiries. And this phase is a very important phase, right? You start getting glimpses of this enlightening feeling, and you don't know what it is, but you know that this is, wow, this is a nice feeling, and you can't hold on to it. It keeps slipping away, but you have experienced that, right? So this phase is very important to get to this phase of intensity, right? A scientist would know this. Somebody who is in a university will know, okay, second year starting to specialize, you don't know everything, but they're learning the fundamentals and starting to specialize from the general to becoming a specialist. Now, many people, if you can get to this stage already, it's very good. But here it is that, if you did this, now something very interesting happens. You see that you are now less distracted with that frivolous things in our lives. People gossiping, people bickering, all those things stops because your mind is now thirsty. Swamiji says, ullatin pasi, the search for wanting to know the truth. So everything else is not so important. Even there's a major thing, like, never mind, it's okay, you are not distracted from this, right? So you see that because of that convergence from outside to inside and the intensity, your mind is on a state of expansion, transformation. And in that process, it puts everything else in the back burner. So anger, hatred, jealousy, greed, lust, all those things take a back seat, right? And you see that your sense of when you catch yourself, you have a sense of, wow, I didn't have all these things. Now I feel a little bit more peaceful, more harmonious, and I understand things. I may not understand everything. My understanding is increasing. My understanding and awareness becomes more greater. So we start seeing that the level of harmonious state of our mind starts intensifying. It's a beautiful feeling. You've not come to the final understanding, but you're getting there. But and there's a nice feeling of discovery, right? So this is what, if you can come to that intensity of the 2 years, I think you'll see that there's a change that starts taking place. The way you think, the way you speak, the way you behave starts transforming. But why is it that many people don't get there? And I myself sometimes have slipped in the early days, and I can see why that is the case. I was lucky that when I slipped, I had gurus that nudged me back, pushed me back, right? So what is it that we need to look out for that distracts us? Number one is that the lack of consistency in reading. We stop reading, we stop intensifying. And that is something very interesting. People who are in this path, sometimes they stop reading, but they think they know everything, right? So the ego gets in the way, right? So what I call pseudo understanding, you think you understand everything, but not really, right? So the lack of we stop reading, stop the inquiry, because we think we know everything, right? And when there's lack of understanding what is read, right? So what is lack, we don't read. Whatever we read, we don't understand. We do rote learning, oh, this is what it is. This is what we memorize things. And many people memorize a lot of things from scriptures, but they don't understand what it means, right? That's number one. So one is lack of consistency in reading. Two is whatever they read, they don't understand. They don't ask, why am I doing this? What does this actually really mean? How is this related to me, the universe, and the concept of God? That finer sharpness is not there. When that is missing, then you have the lack of integration of what you learn in your day-to-day lives, because you don't understand. So how do you put it to practice? How do you observe it in your life, right? So when we lack that experiential learning. It's very abstract. The deities become abstract, something supernatural, right? Not natural phenomena. So that experiential learning is not there. That is why you see Swamiji says in Tamil, Arivin Arival, Arivin Telivirum Telivai Tenda Jnanam, Jnaname Unarvu, Unarve Ungalin Arivu. He says that experiential learning is very important. We can read from books, but until you experience it, you won't know what that is. I have many disciples that come and say, Guru, I've read a lot about meditation and everything, but I don't know what you're speaking about, the Unarvu. Recently, when we opened up the center, when they got the initiation, they say, I'm feeling this vibration. I'm feeling this. How is this possible? Right? What is the science behind this? I can feel this. Initially, I did not understand what this is, but now I can feel it. I can experience it. The mind is more quieter, right? So this experiential learning, that you continue this, the first 21 days, and then the first year, you start seeing that it's resonating. This is what we call the rhythm of life. Bhagavan's Geetam, God's, symphony, right? So many names that are used. But because that lack of intensity and the integration, we don't get that experiential learning. It becomes theoretical. God becomes theoretical. But one who continuously, that state of flux in terms of shifting from outside to inside, they can feel that resonation. They know something is there beyond the biology or animating that biology. So what happens is that the lack of experiential learning, after a while, they give up. There's so much only you can memorize. There's so much only the mind can take. But if the mind experiences, it becomes inspired and it becomes everlasting. If you get the mind to memorize it, it will forget. It cannot memorize. This is the space or the the RAM for it to hold on to theoretical knowledge is very limited, but experiential, inspirational knowledge is much more bigger. Over time, they will give up reading, reflecting, introspecting. That's why I see many of the books are not open. Maybe first 3 or 4 pages they read. That's it, right? I not only Mahan's teachings, I've taught Upanishads and all those various things. Hardly, many of them pick it up and read it, reflect on it, So this is what I said. It's continuously thinking about it, every day you're thinking about, how does this relate to you? The contemplation stops. So when you give up reading, the contemplative nature of the mind stops. When that stops, the meditational depth also stops. And ultimately, everything you give up. So after the 2 years in that process of lack of intensity, everything fizzles out. And I've seen people who have been initiated from Mahan, they'll come very well, and then after a while, it just fizzles out. And after 20, 30 years, they bring their children, Guru, they were probably initiated by Mahan or Guru Sangaran, and they give up for so many years, 20, 30 years, they bring their children, Guru Sangaran's son, can you initiate my son? So I used to ask them, how come you have not practiced? He says, they're so busy. So again, we see that, that generational loss, is a major loss for themselves and the family. So this lack of the depth. So this is why the intensity is so important. So how do we overcome this? How do we look at the telltale signs of we are gravitating to this? So this is what we do. We have to keep to your reading. You have to have a plan every day to read a passage or two, consistent. Whether you understand it or not doesn't really matter. Every morning when you wake up, you do your meditation, pick up a passage. Doesn't matter whose book, a great Mahan's book. Could be Paranjoti Mahan, it could be Ramana, it could be anyone's book. Take a passage and read it, Try to intensify your understanding. Don't just read it. You've got to intensify what does it really mean in the context of who you are, what the universe around you, and the concept of the creator of God. What does this passage tell about all three? And what does it say about the convergence of all three? That's what mind should be starting to. That intensified understanding every day will lead you to that progress, right? Sometimes when I'm driving the car, that thing is always running in my mind. What does it actually mean? How does it relate to me? When I'm doing my research or having my breakfast or speaking to people, it's always in the back of the mind. Ultimately, yes, I've got it. The moment you get it, it becomes integrated into your DNA. So that intensity is very important. And then when you get it, you put it to practice, right? Say, this situation is here. I know how to tweak it from outside to inside. I know how to tweak these challenges into opportunities for learning. I know how to tweak these scars into stars. See? So I know how to tweak these pressures in my life into treasures to see what is it that I can stand out, become transcendental to this. So we start putting it to practice. This is year 2. We're learning to become a specialist in trying to master what this universe is about, who this creator God is, who am I, and how we are interrelated. So that experiential learning starts enhancing further. You start saying, but in all this process, every small thoughts or anger, hatred, and all, there's no room for that. The mind doesn't entertain that because you're so preoccupied with this dynamics between who am I, what is this universe, who this creator is, how is that related to the food that I eat in the morning, how is it related to the relationships I have with my family, or with the friends, or with my profession, or with the research I'm doing, or students I'm teaching, or with the gurus that I'm with. So all that is continuously in this three orbit. How is it all related to? This is where you start getting that experience. Suddenly you see that, you're talking to your disciple and they speak to you, and suddenly you get an idea. This is a beautiful experience that you start learning from one another. You start reading widely, not just the teachings of your guru. You start reading widely about all the other masters, scientific work, philosophical work, artistic work, right? You become more and more universal. As I said, that hunger, ullatin pasi, you're searching for this dynamics between all three. You start contemplating a great philosophy. You start reading about Lao Tzu. You start reading about, Mahavira. You start reading about all these great people's teachings, and there must be something in them that made them universal greatness. So your mind and intellect and your soul are drawn to this great people because of the great philosophies that you are gravitating. So there's a magnet that attracts you, and you're starting to converge. What it's saying is you're starting to converge to their own universal mindset, right? So you've unleashed something that is phenomenal when this convergence of yourself, understanding of yourself, the universe, and also God, you start converging to the great philosophies. As I was doing this, I love mathematics and I specialize in mathematics. I started reading about mathematicians, and you can see that some of them were thinking about abstract mathematics and looking at the universe in a completely different way, right? And it was very useful for me as I was doing my research in maths and other areas. So you start contemplating not just the traditional spiritual masters, but you look at great scientists and great thinkers, and you start reading, Carl Jung and all these great people, and you say, wow, that ocean of knowledge is so expansive that I'm immersed in it. And in that process, we see that we deepen our experiential learning and the experience of our own self. We are actually immersed in that self that is the converged universe, the creator, whatever we call it, and we can feel that our mind starts transforming to becoming more and more universal. And this requires that intensity. And you see that things become more clearer, not full clarity yet, more clearer. And that search continues. And when you do all this, you start saying, wow, my harmonious level is only so much. Now it's 44%. I still have to discover that 63 or 56% that I have. So it's not the end that is really matters. The journey that you take to experience that harmoniousness is what makes life really an awesome journey. So you see that what you write, what you experience, you feel that the kind of language changes. It's quite interesting. I said the change is happening, right? You see, when Monday morning comes, the first thing comes to my mind is Monday is a moksha day, a mukti day, an enlightenment day, right? Tuesday comes transcendental or terrific. So you start linking each day with a word that gives you an inspiration of what that day is going to be. Wednesday, wisdom or winsome. Thursday, transcendental. Friday is freedom. So you start seeing every day there is something positive that is imprinted in your mind. Saturday and Sunday. And when Monday comes, you start looking at this next cycle of positivity, right? So we start seeing that convergence leads us to becoming more and more inspirational, more and more positive, more and more universal. And in all this process, our meditation becomes more and more supreme. Our meditation, our introspection, contemplation takes us to the depth of our own consciousness. And you see that when we go deeper, all the waves of the materiality, the turbulence of the materiality starts subsiding. Ultimately, we'll reach to a state of serenity, calmness, and the peacefulness that gives us greater clarity of life, greater clarity of who we are, greater clarity of what the universe is, and greater clarity of this creator or God that we call. So this is what the journey that one, but it all takes a lot of effort, a lot of discipline, allocating time for oneself. So this is what one should achieve in the first 2 years of intensity of this practice. Sandoshan.